They tortured her until her bones cracked, yet she never gave in. Anne Askew's story is one of the most brutal and haunting in Tudor England. I mean, imagine choosing faith over family, enduring torture that broke nearly everyone else, and still refusing to bow. Her courage shocked the world, and her fate, even darker. Hold on though, here is the start of everything. Anne, born in 1521 in Lincolnshire, England. Askew was right in the thick of one of the most turbulent religious eras in history. Her family was Catholic, firmly grounded in traditional beliefs, yet Anne's mind was already wandering towards something far more perilous: Protestantism. And changing religion back then was almost a death sentence, not just a private decision. Anne married affluent landowner Thomas Kyme as a young lady, and from the outside, it should have been a safe marriage. The catch here is that her beliefs conflicted with her husband's expectations. Anne's increasing adherence to Protestant values set them apart rather than allowing her to slide into the life of a submissive wife. The marriage crumbled under the pressure. Divorce nowadays was nearly unheard of in the 1500s, especially for women. Anne, however, did the unheard of. She left her husband not for another man, not for freedom in the contemporary sense, but rather just for her religion. That decision on its own set her apart. It was a change rather than simply disobedience, and it put her on a crash course with the most potent powers in England. Here is where things start to be much more dangerous. Anne was diving headfirst into Protestant literature, the sort of works completely outlawed during the period, rather than just silently practicing her faith. Imagine sneaking around with texts that could literally get you executed if discovered. Anne was obviously reading, interrogating, and spreading these revolutionary ideas, not hiding. She stopped there. Anne started to share Protestant beliefs with others and promoted discussions directly questioning Catholic authority. Each phrase she uttered and every book she gave away moved her further into jeopardy. The religious mood in England was, in the meanwhile, a tempest. Protestant voices had power one day. Catholics retook control the next. Every change meant death or life, depending on your point of view. Though Anne was aware of the dangers, she leaned in harder rather than retreating. That disobedience, that would make her unforgettable. Why, though, it becomes even more chaotic. Henry VIII declared himself the head of the Church of England in 1534, breaking from Rome and the Catholic Church. Seems like a victory for reformers, doesn't it? Not at all. His choice had more to do with power, dominance, and politics than it did with faith. Following Henry, England swung between extremes. Every fresh king either strengthened Catholic dominance or enabled Protestant reform. People were scared by that continuous flip-flop. You could be loyal today and labeled a heretic tomorrow. Then in 1539, the Act of 6 Articles made essential Protestant convictions punishable by death. It was meant to scare anyone considering defying rather than just being rough. This fostered mistrust as neighbors turned against one another, and trust vanished. And Anne Askew, not wanting to bend, remained right in the middle of all the religious turmoil. This section utterly stunned me. Anne was not just another silent believer. The officials had her eyes locked on her. She had developed into a full-fledged Protestant. Still aware of the risk, she continued to spread Protestant literature across London. Every whispered chat and every pamphlet was a straight attack on the system. The authorities had had enough by 1545. Anne was apprehended and presented before Bishop Bonner of London, a man well known for his relentless persecution of heretics. Most of us wilted beneath his interrogation, but Anne did not. Her audacity amazed everyone. Bonner flatly rejected the Catholic Mass when she pressed her, challenging the core of Catholic theology. She even dared to question the Pope's authority, something almost impossible for a woman of her day. Her replies were forceful, certain, and unyielding, not subdued. Here's what made it even more upsetting, though. Even as Bonner hinted at torture, Anne did not waver. Her conviction remained unwavering. She stood firm. That interrogation should have broken her spirit, but instead, it proved her bravery. And for the government, that resistance just made her a larger danger. And just when it seemed like Anne's nightmare was over, things got even worse. She was arrested again, this time under even greater pressure. But this wasn't just about her beliefs anymore. The authorities wanted blood. They demanded she give up the names of other Protestant reformers. Now, think about that for a second. Her body was already weak from imprisonment, her life hanging by a thread, and all she had to do was betray her allies to save herself. Anyone else might have cracked, but Anne didn't. She refused to speak a single name. That silence wasn't just stubbornness, it was loyalty, courage, and unshakable resolve all rolled into one. She'd rather face death than hand over her fellow believers. And that decision sealed her fate, because in the eyes of her enemies, Anne Askew had crossed a line she could never return from. But wait, this is where the story takes a horrifying turn. After her second arrest, Anne was sent to the infamous Tower of London, a place reserved for traitors, spies, and the so-called most dangerous enemies of the crown. For Anne, it wasn't just a prison, it became a chamber of agony. Inside those cold stone walls, she was strapped to the rack, the most feared torture device of Tudor England. Picture this. Her body stretched mercilessly, joints tearing apart, bones cracking, muscles shredding with every turn of the wheel. Most prisoners broke within minutes, screaming out confessions or names just to make the pain stop. But Anne? She refused. Not a single name escaped her lips. She didn't betray her friends, and she didn't renounce her faith. The rack was designed to break the strongest men, yet here was a young woman, enduring it with an iron will. What's even more shocking is that Anne became one of the very few women in recorded history who endured the rack without breaking. Every pull of the ropes could have been her end, yet she held firm, her silence and her faith intact. It wasn't just resistance, it was defiance carved into her very flesh. This distinguishes Anne. She is unforgettable. Her pain went beyond the physical. Her spirit and consciousness stayed intact even as her body crumbled. Though the suffering took her power, her faith remained unaltered. She leaned on her faith in God like an anchor, keeping her steady in the storm. That toughness turned her from merely another persecution victim into a living emblem of bravery. Those who learned of her suffering saw someone who would rather suffer extreme pain than compromise her soul, not just suffering. In many respects, Anne's mental fortitude outperformed even her physical stamina. Though the rack could rip her apart, it could not silence her belief. And that inner fire, that refusal to break, is what lifted her story beyond disaster into myth. She was inspiring, even as she struggled, not only living. Anne's destiny was determined just as it seemed she had survived the worst. She was officially accused of heresy, one of the most deadly accusations of Tudor England, after she declined to conform or recant her Protestant faith. And the only penalty was death by burning at the stake. Anne's body was broken by the torture at this point. Though her limbs were fractured and her energy gone, her spirit stayed, strongest now. She strode, or rather was carried, into that courtroom, not like a defeated prisoner, but as a woman unaffected by all they had done to her. Her punishment was more than just a legal procedure. It was a public pronouncement aimed at scaring others into silence. Anne's bravery, however, made her deadly even when she was losing rather than fearing. She was not dying only for herself, but also as a symbol of protest. And now the most harsh chapter. On July 16, 1546, Anne Askew was dragged through the streets of London to Smithfield, the scene of many public executions. Anne could not even stroll, however, unlike most condemned inmates. So wounded had she been left by the rack that she had to be brought to the stake. Eager and terrified, crowds gathered to observe the last moments of the adolescent woman. Her body might have been fragile, but her spirit radiated vigor. Tied to the wooden pole, she resembled a martyr more than a criminal. The intolerable anguish started the moment the flames were lit. Though fire engulfed her body, Anne stayed cool, and her voice rose higher over the crackle of burning wood. She prayed out loud, rejecting her killer's efforts to quiet her religion. Her last words were unforgettable. "I die for the love of God and for the gospel of Jesus Christ." Those who saw it were amazed. Anne Askew announced her faith and refused to scream in sorrow, even in the face of terrible pain. She transcended victimhood from Tudor brutality and turned into a legend right then. Anne's passing rattled England. For Protestants, her murder was both awful and motivational. It was a terrifying reminder for Catholics of the consequences of defiance. But no matter where people stood, no one could forget the small lady who confronted the fires without shattering. Published posthumously and covertly among Protestants, her writings, including poetry, letters, and interrogation transcripts, were published posthumously. Their witness of faith under fire went far beyond simple words written on paper. Her bravery burst from every line, driving the Reformation and motivating many future reformers. The way Anne's tale emphasized the part women play in religious revolt is even more potent. Anne stood boldly, preaching, educating, and holding firm even under torture at a time when women were meant to remain silent. She defied her day's expectations and showed that faith and conviction had no gender. Her martyrdom elevated her beyond a historical character. It made her a perennial symbol of bravery, rebellion, and steadfast faith. Her name still reverberates as one of the bravest voices to ever fight injustice, almost 500 years later. Anne Askew's death wasn't just the end of her life. It was the beginning of her legacy. Burnt, broken, but never silenced, she remains a symbol of unshakable conviction. So, what about you? Would you have that kind of courage? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.